Hello, everyone. Uh, we are going to wait just a minute or two to let everybody get into the room. Looks like we're slowing down. We'll give it another minute. All right, let's get started. It looks like we're kind of slowing down with people coming into the room. Welcome to the Florida Friendly Programs professional webinar series. It's a series given every second Tuesday of the month at 10 a.m. My name is Jen Marvin, and I'm the Florida Friendly Landscaping coordinator, education coordinator. This week we have Ondine Wells and Yilin Zhuang, who are speakers talking to us on advancing water efficiency in Florida's landscapes. So your microphones have been muted. If you'd like to ask a question, please type it in the Q&A box instead of the chat box, and we will answer the questions at the end of the presentation. Stick around until the end and take our exit survey. It helps us at FFL give you the kind of programming that you'd like to see in our next webinar series. Join us next month for it's June 9th at 10 a.m. It's developing a weed management plan with Chris Marble, Dr. Chris Marble. I'm going to hand it over to our speakers today. And if you'd please introduce yourselves, that would be great. So
Thank you so much, Jen.
Thank you.
And thank you everyone for joining us today. So today we will talk about a project we did in last couple of years. It's advancing water efficient landscaping in Florida, industries, barriers, opportunities, and the practical pathways. So I'm Yilin Zhuang. I'm the Water Resources Regional Specialized Agent with IFAS Extension. Joining me today is my colleague Ondine Wells, the Water Resources Extension Agent in Marion County. So next slide. Here's the outline for today. So I will give a background of our project and what's our project goal and some methods. Then Ondine will discuss some key barriers identified by the industry, opportunities, and industry-driven solutions. And the last, just want to share some lesson we learned from the audience and the stakeholder experience. Before we started, we have these poll questions here, because this project is really to understand the green industry's perspective, our stakeholders' perspective. Everyone here is a key component of our green industry. You are our stakeholders. So really want to get a sense of who is here. And from you can see it's on the, we have the slide there with the poll question, but there's also a pop-up window with the question. It's which best describe your role, and there's some options. So please use the pop-up window to select your answer. So we're really curious to know which industry you represent and who are joining us today. So we'll give a few seconds here. I know it's not a complete list. It may be some it's like fall under the category of others. If you don't mind, you can send it to us. Like if it's others, tell us what other industry it is. So we have a few options here. It's landscape contractors, landscape architects or designers, irrigation professionals, planners with local government, growers, nursery growers, HOA management, utility, and others. So we'll give 5 seconds and we'll close the pool and see who are joining us today. Hard to count on Zoom. 5 seconds feel like 5 minutes. All right. Oh, nice. I think you can see all the results here. It's really like we have basically all these industry partners and a lot of answered others. Not sure if the chat box is disabled or if we'll allow them just to text us, like the panelists, to let us know your profession. All right, so I think it's in the background. Let's move on. So you might be all familiar with these maps. It's from 1,000 Friends with some partners, agencies in Florida. So long story short, Florida is a growing state. Using these maps, like red represents developed lands. So you can see really from 2010, the baseline to 2070, the projected developments will tremendously increase. So if you look at the map on your right, the top is the baseline now. We have red area, developed land, primary on coastal area. The projection 2070. So we will have a tremendously more developed land, not just along the coast. More, it's also moving into inland along the I-75 for interstate. And on the other side, with the development, with the land development, and then you can move to the next slide if you don't mind. We can also see the increase of water demand. It's the same study by 1,000 Friends. So the map here is showing it's the water demand. So the darker the red is, it's the higher water demand per census block. So it really follows the pattern of the developed land, how it's like you can see on the pattern, the top, it's a little bit on the coastal area, but the bottom map, you see it's the high water demand have moved also into the inland where more developed land in inland. And it's projected water demand will increase by close to 900 million gallons per day between 2020 and 2040. And agricultural water demand was the #1 water user, but not anymore. Public supply has exceeded agricultural water use. Next slide, please. So where is the water going? So study shows about 50 to 70% of home water use actually happens outdoors, especially when there's an automated irrigation system or there's the irrigated landscape. So creating water efficient landscapes is critical to meeting our water demand. Next slide, please. So that's a study conducted by a UF IFAS Extension program called H2O Safe. It found an average, like average irrigation system on average lot size in Florida. So the one cycle for irrigation system use about 991 gallons of water. So we are seeing heavy water use in home irrigation systems, and the amount of residential development is on the rise. In order to meet future demands, it's critical to find ways to reduce the residential irrigation. So that brings to the goal of our project is to engage stakeholders across the green industry to identify opportunities, challenges, and solutions for promoting water efficient landscaping practices, especially in these new developments. So next slide, please. So before we share our results with you, just want to hear, like before we influence your answers, so really want to hear your insights on this particular question. When you have seen a water efficient landscape work successfully, what contribute most to that success? So Becky, if you don't mind, the launch poll number 2. And I know there are a lot of options here, so please only choose to 2. I know it's not easy, just shoot up to 2. And again, please select your answer on the pop-up screen. So I'm going to read it. So we have a few options here. Appropriate plant selection, good irrigation design and management, soil preparation and soil health, educated homeowners or clients, professional landscape maintenance, collaboration among contractors, designers, and managers, HOA or local government support, water budgeting or monitoring technology, realistic homeowner expectations. So when you see a water efficient landscape work, what contribute most to that success? All right, most of you already complete this poll. We'll close this poll in a few seconds. I know choose up to 2, it's not easy. All right, let's see what you all think. All right, we have here the highest rank here. Most of you think it's you selected appropriate plant selection, followed by good irrigation design and management. And the third here is educated homeowners and clients. Thank you so much for taking the poll and let us know your perspective. So now we'll move to our project method, because our goal is to engage stakeholders in green industry. So that's that's the method we use. The time frame for this particular project is from November 2025 to July 2020. Actually, it's November 2024. Sorry for the typo here. November 2024 to July 2025. That's what we are going to present our findings. But meanwhile, that's also an ongoing project, and we are continue working on that. So a few tasks we did include key informant interviews, because water efficient landscaping is such a broad project. So we first did these interviews really to explore the complexity of these issues, and then identify the key participants for our focus group, or we can say what's a better way to engage them and get their perspective. So we did interview these individuals, or we can consider them as thought leaders. So from like industry, from like FNGOA, from academia, from government. And these interviews are ranging from like 30 minutes to 45 minutes. And we did that from November 2024 to January 2025. And after that, next slide, please. We also did interviews with growers, and particularly with nursery growers, to capture their perspectives. And the method we used was we went to these landscape shows where these nursery growers or vendors were there. So we did 2 FNGOA sponsored landscape shows. One was in Jacksonville and the other was in Orlando. And we interviewed total 43 growers. And then, I want to mention, I don't want to forget, I have notes here. And for this particular surveys, like interview with, surveys with growers, it's a survey / interview, because we did ask some follow-up questions. And the primary focus on 3 categories of questions: how they decide what to grow and sell, whether they consider their products part of the water efficient landscaping chain, and then it's challenges they face in growing or they selling water efficient materials. And then the third step we did is the focus groups. And for focus groups, we aim to gather in-depth insights into industry needs and challenges. So what we did was virtual focus groups. We had 5 virtual focus groups, total 20 stakeholders, and we used a third-party facilitator. Later, I will give more info about the focus group. And the last we did for this project was the open house. Really just like want to bring all these stakeholders we involve in this project, from the interviews to the surveys to the groups, share out our results. So now we'll move to focus groups, because for this presentation, we'll primarily focus on the findings from focus groups. So as earlier mentioned, the focus group, the format we used was virtual focus groups. Since it was a statewide project, virtual focus groups made the participation easier, just less travel, less like that kind of coordination. So it was about an hour and a half session on Zoom, and we total had 5 sessions. We provide incentives for our participants, really just appreciate their time in this focus group discussion. So we gave them $75 gift card upon completion. And for this focus group, so we use a third-party facilitator. Ondine and I did work on the facilitation guide, what questions we would like ask our focus group participants, just to make sure the conversation is unbiased and no one really take a stand on that. So like from the team per se. So we hired a third-party facilitator to moderate, to facilitate the focus group discussions. And we received their consent, then we record the sessions and transcribed. That's how we got the transcripts, and we did a qualitative analysis. Next slide, please. As far as the participants, so each group, we keep it small, like 2 to 7, because we want to have a good discussion. We have a series of questions and really want to collect all the feedbacks from our participants. And the participants actually, they represent across the whole industry. And even for each focus group, we make sure there's a representation, like we try not to duplicate the representation in each focus group. So here you can see we have builders, developers, irrigation contractors, public and private utilities, growers, nursery growers, turf growers, homeowner association members, board members, landscape architects, and nonprofit organizations. As far as the focus group questions, here shows the category of the questions. Actually, each category, there's a whole set of detailed questions. Again, because we want to capture these like insights into these questions, these qualitative insights. So the category of these questions include what is a water efficient landscape? What they think is the critical part of that. What are the drivers for implementing water efficient landscaping? What are the challenges? Some questions related to landscape materials, some economics and market trends, and also current practice and innovations. And the last ask what kind of resource and support they will need for advancing water efficient landscapes. So before we dive into our findings, so want to hear your thought on the water efficient landscapes, because that was the first category of questions we ask our focus group participants. So here on the pop-up screen, you can see poll number 3. What features are most associated with water efficient landscaping? Again, I know it's tricky. You cannot select all, up to 2. So there are a list of features here. Please select up to 2. So I'm going to read all these options. Forest-friendly plants, native plants, smart irrigation, reduced turf, soil improvement, low maintenance, drought tolerance, water budgeting, rain sensors, or controllers. It's not a complete list. So if you have other answers, feel free to share with us. But with this pool, up to 2, I know it's hard. I want to select all. So we'll give everyone a few seconds to think about what are the up to most important features or relevant features associated with water efficient landscaping. All right, I think most of you already select the answer. Just gave you, oh, all right, let's see the answer. Oh, super. And actually we have a close tie here. It's a very close answer. The top one is for the friendly plants, followed by smart irrigation. And then it's drought tolerant, which is so relevant to now because we're still in the drought. And then it's native plants. And about a quarter of the participants picked reduced turf. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing your perspective with us. With that, I will hand it to Ondine to discuss some findings we find from our project.
Great. Thank you, Yilin, and welcome to everybody who's here. Thank you for joining us. So you're probably wondering why we didn't conduct a survey and why we went with focus groups. One of the reasons we did this was because focus groups helps to lend themselves to revealing information that you may not learn from a survey and help us to uncover issues or challenges that we might not have thought of before. So it's a great way to really explore all aspects of an issue. So the first thing we're going to do is cover some of the key barriers that were noted by stakeholders who participated. And when we reviewed the transcripts, which we had about 150 pages of transcripts, we sort of identified 6 key barriers, and those are the categories here, which we'll go into in greater depth. So not surprising, one of the barriers that we heard from stakeholders was that there are economic constraints and also time constraints. Builders in particular experience this as a pain point. So there are high upfront costs that they have, such as paying for plants, irrigation, and when they use them, soil amendments. In addition, builders who participate in water certification programs find that these programs can take a lot of time in terms of learning all of the components and then also to complete those components. So one of the stakeholders said, quote, for the temporary irrigation, we're getting close to $1,000 of a home of unnecessary costs that I have to pass on. And this is referring to the builder having to put in temporary irrigation to help the plants get established before the home is sold. But then once the whole home is sold, they're not allowed to keep the irrigation in place and then they have to pull it out. So these are just one example of some of the costs that they mentioned. The second challenge relates to the supply and demand for plants. So sometimes builders and developers who are seeking drought-tolerant plants find that there's not enough supply when they actually need them for installation. So, for example, one stakeholder said, we wanted to only do Florida native in a specific neighborhood. And the issue wasn't finding the Florida native plants, it was finding enough of it. The week of install and the installer saying they can't get the quantity. And so we had to do a lot of substitutions. Another often mentioned challenge relates to inefficient irrigation systems. So there are a number of issues that were mentioned that contribute to this challenge. To begin with, you can have poor designs. So, for example, if spray heads are put in locations where they're easily run over and easily broken, this just ultimately results in more leaks. Many stakeholders mentioned that there's not a licensure requirement for irrigation contractors. So this was mentioned over and over again as a challenge within the industry. And lastly, homeowners are typically not aware of how to manage their own system for water efficiency. And so one of the stakeholders said there's a lot of inconsistencies in those maintenance companies and how they manage irrigation. And so they're also referring to um, landscape maintenance companies that come in and have to maintain a landscape, perhaps for a homeowner, but they're not necessarily consistent as well in terms of how they manage these irrigation systems and may not have the training. Another challenge that was mentioned by numerous stakeholders was the lack of consistent regulations or standards across jurisdictions. So, for industry professionals who work in different counties or work across water management districts, they have to figure out what the requirements are in each place, which means that it's going to take them additional time and complications on their end. Stakeholders also expressed a desire to be involved earlier on when developing these kinds of requirements or programs so that they could provide an industry perspective when creating these systems. So, one of the quotes was, "There are too many different people driving the changes. It's hard to track. When the regulations are on the site that you are, it gets really complicated." And probably not surprising to many on this webinar, another challenge that was repeated and was noted in our poll is that there's a lack of homeowner knowledge. So there's an impression that new residents who are coming to Florida are not familiar with Florida landscapes, and that buyers in general have specific landscape expectations when they're buying a home, and that those buyer expectations or perceived ones are then driving the landscape design. And then once the homeowner takes responsibility of their landscape, they may not know how best to maintain that landscape and how to attain water efficiency. So one stakeholder said, a lot of homeowners don't even know there are water restrictions. They're not enforced, and they're not enforced. So the last challenge that I'm going to expand on a little bit further, because if we dive into this, we start to understand how complex some of these challenges are and how they're not always easy to resolve. So the one I'm going to talk about specifically is plant establishment. So if we describe what plant establishment is as the period of adjustment that a plant undergoes after being planted. And ideally, as a plant's roots grow, the plant becomes adapted to the new location so that it does not need supplemental care. And in the case of water efficient landscape, the hope is that the plant does not need supplemental water, except perhaps in extreme drought conditions like we're experiencing now. So with that in mind, successful plant establishment was seen by stakeholders as a key component of attaining water efficiency. But achieving successful plant establishment involves many different stakeholders, and there are many different factors that actually influence this success. So, if we're trying to achieve plant establishment, it starts with the type of plants that are used in the landscape. And those plants come from growers, but the demand is largely based on the market demands from builders and developers. The builders and developers often work with various subcontractors to decide what plants will be going into the landscape, where the plants are going to go, how the irrigation system is going to be designed, and what the soil conditions will be. Once the home is sold, the homeowner is now responsible for getting the new landscape plants established, and they may in turn rely upon landscape maintenance companies, irrigation companies, or their HOAs to help manage that landscape. And lastly, we have various regulators who may influence the landscape and irrigation design, how much water can be used for establishment, and also the source of that water. So stakeholders noted that successful plant establishment is influenced by a number of different things. So first, regulations can sometimes limit the establishment period. So one of the stakeholders said, Muni codes allow and have language for what is considered establishment time periods of 60 days. When we talk about cost, we're going back to that quote that I mentioned earlier about temporary irrigation systems as one example. When we talk about the water needed for establishment, in some places where reclaimed water is used, the availability of that reclaimed water can actually become a challenge. So one of the stakeholders said municipalities will run out of reclaimed water, and then we can't water the turf, the plants, or anything. A number of people talked about soil quality, and a stakeholder said establishment periods oftentimes are dictated by the soil types and construction practices that are done. And lastly, we come back to the homeowner behaviors. So one person said the landscaper sets that clock for the turf to establish, and then the homeowner doesn't touch it. So ultimately, what happens is if that timer is set for establishment period and the homeowner is not familiar with how long that period is, they may not then know how to fix that timer once the plants have been established. So we're going to go into our next poll, which is, have you personally worked on a project that intentionally aimed to reduce irrigation water use? And this is pretty simple here. We have frequently, occasionally, rarely, or never. And this helps us because one of the things that we wanted to do was to understand how many industry professionals are specifically tasked with or have worked on projects that are honed in on water. So we're going to give a little bit of time for you to respond to this. And we really like hearing your responses because we've got a really diverse group of people listening, and how you respond is going to help us also think about our next steps in terms of future research. So your input is really valuable. Thank you. And I think we're about to close up this poll. All righty. Okay, we're gonna, once we reach 70. Okay, and so we have a pretty good division here. So about 34% have said occasionally. Great. 27% of respondents said that they frequently have worked on a project intentionally to reduce irrigation water use. Excellent. And then we have some folks who haven't done it so much. So we're hoping that maybe there are some tidbits here that you'll learn that you can carry forth in your work. So thanks so much for responding. All right, so now we're going to move into opportunities. So we have lots of challenges, and we also have opportunities within those challenges. So when we go through these, there were challenges that were mentioned in each of these as well at times, but there were some really clear areas where we feel like we could help improve water efficient landscaping. So the first one is that stakeholders support the development of new cultivars, particularly for grasses that are slower growing and drought tolerant. And there is research going on this, and so there's definitely an interest in that. One of the challenges is that sometimes when we have new cultivars, it also still needs to be maintained to show that these can be successful. So if they aren't maintained well, then those cultivars sometimes aren't given a chance to show that they can be successful. Some stakeholders have also found that customers, homeowners, are requesting more Florida-friendly plants and natives. And one stakeholder said that turf type is something that it's a constant conversation in our industry of trying to find different varieties that are more drought tolerant. And another stakeholder said we're seeing a lot more native plants being installed. So another opportunity is to look at our soil health. And I noticed that on our polls, this hasn't really risen to the elevation of like being an important component, but this actually was mentioned across different focus groups as being really important. So stakeholders noted that when construction is done, the soils are typically very challenging for establishing and maintaining plants. So they're kind of like this builder's sand. You can see here in this picture, it's usually kind of devoid of the microbial life that's needed and the nutrients. But when the soils are healthy or have been amended with soil amendments, they can provide a great opportunity for water efficiency. So stakeholders also, some of them were aware of research that's been done on the effectiveness of soil amendments. And this has raised the awareness overall of soil health. So these soils not only help plants to establish, but they can also help to increase its believed water efficiency. So one stakeholder noted that soil is key to the irrigation being successful. And another stakeholder said, soil amendments are something that we've considered. We're finding the soils have a bigger impact on the landscape quality, the quality and longevity than watering does. But we're trying to get those costs down. So this comes back to one of those challenges of cost as well. So stakeholders noted that one way we can circumvent or ameliorate the challenges of homeowner behaviors that were mentioned is to provide professional maintenance and irrigation services that are specifically focused in on water efficiency. So there are a lot of businesses out there that are doing maintenance and irrigation, but to have a little bit more honing in on the water use piece. And in particular, water managers were mentioned. So this is an individual or teams of people that oversee and track water use with the goal of conservation. So one stakeholder said the best examples are using, which are those that are saving water is what they're referring to. The best examples are using water managers who are looking over that irrigation 24/7. There's several communities like that are really saving a lot of water. So we don't always think of regulations as being a positive thing, but several stakeholders noted that regulations can be really effective at driving water savings. And in particular, consumptive use permits were mentioned as one as being important. So one person said, it's definitely reverse engineering with consumptive use permits, but it is effective, right? At the end of the day, if you really want to make change, this is one of the few tools that work with pretty much limited exception. It was noted that when you have regulations, enforcement is a really important part of that. Just having a regulation, whether it's a local ordinance or such, without enforcement isn't typically reaching the effectiveness. So, two water management tools were mentioned by numerous stakeholders. The first one is looking at digital metering, such as advanced metering infrastructure. And these can provide water managers with real time water usage. So, one stakeholder said these digital meters are able to have that ability to capture these leaks quicker. And so, this is sort of a diagram showing kind of how an AMI system might work, but it can provide basically real-time usage. And so if you have a water manager tracking that water usage, they can see where individual households might be, their water usage has spiked, and maybe there's a leak there. So that helps them to kind of target those leaks and bring that water use down. Or if there's a high water user, how to identify them sooner than they otherwise might through a monthly bill, per se, for example. Another strategy is a water budget, which sets a target limit for the amount of water that a development can use, for example. So one stakeholder said, tell us how much water we can use, and then we'll create the successful landscapes. So in this case, the stakeholder felt that, that rather than creating specific criteria that they have to meet, such as a type of landscape or a specific percentage of landscape, they felt that a water budget could be a great way to set a target that's very measurable, and then the industry professionals can figure out what flexible approaches they could use to actually attain that target. So the last main opportunity that was identified by stakeholders was to have more opportunities for industry to engage early on. So, whether that's the development of a certification program or new ordinances or regulations, they felt that if they were involved early on, they could help to express how industry, where their pain points were, where they felt they could make adjustments and kind of create programs that help them achieve the desired goals. And most stakeholders who were involved in the focus groups noted that they really enjoyed having the opportunity to listen to what professionals in other industries are doing. So if you've never participated in a focus group, essentially, like Yilin and I were not participating. We did not take part in that. We would listen, but the facilitator would ask questions, and then participants in the focus group actually answer the questions in turn and can respond to each other. So it really is a unique opportunity um, for each professional to hear from each other and to hear what are the challenges they're experiencing, what are the new things that they're doing. And we heard this over and over in the focus groups. So one person said, collaborating is huge. This group is really representative, and they were referring to the focus group, bringing in growers, manufacturers, along with end consumers and regulatory agencies in a thoughtful way to where everyone can win. It's very hard to do, but worth it when it's done well. And so this is definitely an opportunity to find ways where busy professionals, really don't have a lot of time to do these kinds of things, but when they do, they really appreciated it. So when we bring all of these ideas together, we started trying to create a list of what are some of the features that stakeholders noted are often found in communities that are achieving water savings. And so regulatory requirements were often seen as like a driving force initially, such as a consumptive use permit. But then there were lots of different strategies that they felt had to be in place to help actually meet those requirements. So some of the strategies, which I'll just kind of reiterate, we've already kind of gone through, are the value of measuring water. So water budgeting and digital metering, having a manager, and in particular, water managers or a water managing team whose role is to track and reduce water use ensures that the regulatory requirements are being met. So, some of the strategies that can then help support that management include having landscape designs that, from the get-go, are and irrigation designs are designed to reduce water demands from the beginning. Educating residents always comes up is how can we educate those residents about water conservation and the landscape? And lastly, collaboration across sectors was really seen as something that in successful communities where we're achieving water savings, that collaboration is happening. So, as you probably know, research can sometimes result in more questions than answers. And in the case of this project, we came up with a number of new questions, several of which we hope to explore further in the next year or so. So, the first one is how are new residents' expectations different from longer term residents? So, we hear over and over again new people moving to Florida don't really understand Florida landscapes and they have specific expectations. But what exactly are those? Um, the second one is what are the best practices for achieving water efficiency? So we've started coming up with this list of features, and a next step might be that we look at a community that is achieving water savings and do a case study and dive deeper into exactly how is that working? What are the challenges and things that have made them successful? The next one is how can the establishment period be improved to ensure both plant viability and water efficiency? So this was definitely something that came up that we weren't really expecting a lot of conversation around that emerged in the focus groups, that plant establishment comes with a lot of challenges. And it's not the only one, but it's definitely one that if we can't establish these plants successfully, then the landscape is going to fail and it's not going to help us save water. So how can we make that moment in time more successful? And then the last one is do participatory trials improve plant selection, irrigation efficiency, and water savings? So we have had, there have been some research projects that have been done collaboratively with builders and developers and industry professionals. So how can we kind of continue building on that? And I do have some more information I'm going to share, but what I wanted to do was have another poll where we could find out from you what resources would most help your work. So this is going to really help us. Yilin and I work with Extension, so our focus is education, and we really want to provide resources and help industry professionals in an educational capacity. And as we develop those educational materials, hopefully it'll help also other stakeholders um, grow their water efficiency work. So if you don't mind just taking a quick response to this. So some of the ways that we've identified, but there could be others. So if we don't have an item here that you're thinking of, please put it in the chat so we can see what else you think we could do. So homeowner education materials, plant selection guidance, irrigation training, example case studies, maintenance guidance, local policy consistency, cost share incentives, and demonstration sites. So those are some of the things that have kind of emerged, but there might be others. So please feel free to add in some other ideas into the chat box. And also, we'll have our contact information at the end of this presentation. We really welcome you to reach out to us to help us continue this work. And if you have specific ideas or thoughts on what else we need to hone in on for research purposes and educational. So hopefully, I think we're getting close here to closing the poll. Excellent. And see one person, all of the choices. Yes. Yes. All righty. So I think, do we get the responses for the poll up? There we go. Excellent. So the top one here is irrigation training. Excellent. So it definitely came out in our conversation. Homeowner education materials, plant selection guidance. Wonderful. Okay, so moving on, I'm just going to highlight a few other things that came out of this research. We have a few more minutes, so I'm just going to go through these pretty quickly. One of the things that we did was we really wanted to start to understand the roles that different stakeholders play and how they are interacting with one another. So I'm not going to go into this diagram in great detail, but this was kind of a beginning map to show all the different stakeholders and when those stakeholders are involved in the process. So this flow chart kind of goes from the left is design and installation. The center part where that green box is kind of the establishment period, and then we move into maintenance. So different stakeholders come in at different points of that process. They all are interacting in different ways. So one of the things we're looking at, maybe exploring more, is to better understand who are the key stakeholders and how we can better understand their needs. So as you can see, these two sort of orange boxes, it's hard to see on this diagram, but I'll point out this one on the left is developers and builders, and this one on the right is homeowners. So when you start to put this flow chart together, you can see that these two stakeholders have a lot of interactions happening with them. And so they're probably really key to attaining these successful water efficient landscapes. Not surprising that it's those two. But it's also really important to understand the unique challenges and needs of those if we're going to achieve this. So I have a couple minutes left. I'm going to share a little bit with you the two grower surveys that we also did. So Yilin mentioned that we went and did what we call intercept surveys. So we will go up to people and we talk to them and we have a set number of questions, and they can either answer the questions really quickly or we might end up into a conversation with them. So we did a survey in February of 2025. We had 6 questions at the Jacksonville Landscape Show. And we specifically talked to 12 growers at that, and we wanted to basically know how they decide what they want to grow and sell. And what we found was that main takeaways, again, not too surprising, but demand is the key driver. That demand is coming largely from those landscape architects, landscapers, and contractors. So the growers need to stay in business, so they are going to grow what they feel confident that they can actually sell. A number of people mentioned that requirements can drive up demand for certain types of plants. For example, the Department of Transportation was mentioned twice as a driver for planting more natives and then for creating a demand for natives on the grower side. Growers said that it's really risky to try plants that are not a sure bet or to test out new plants. And that's because it is really hard to make it as a nursery grower. A number of people mentioned this. Um, a number of companies said that they had multiple generations that have been running their companies and they felt a lot of pride in it, but it can be really challenging in this industry. And so they really don't want to take a lot of risks unless they know they can sell the plant. We then did another survey August of last year. This was conducted after the focus groups. We attended the Orlando Landscape Show. We surveyed 21 growers. So I made a little error on the previous slide. It was 21 growers for this one, not 31. Based on what we learned from the focus groups, we decided to ask some new questions about challenges that they faced in their industry, where they go for expert advice, and specific challenges they face with their customers. So we're just going to give a quick highlight of some of those. The top two challenges that they faced as an industry were labor and staffing shortages, 13 people mentioned that, and rising costs. Where they go for expert advice, a lot of people said growers, their other growers and their peers. A few people said extension, and also people go online for information. And then the top groups that they would like to network with. So here's where we really are trying to figure out, like, how do we bring people together? Who in the industry are they wanting to kind of connect with and learn from? And the growers said landscape architects and landscapers, other growers and plant material suppliers, garden centers and retail markets. So those are folks that are more going to the retail market, maybe less on the developer side. And then also municipalities, developers, and large projects. So, and then the last thing that we talked about were customer challenges. So we highlight here three of the main customers that they felt they had: landscape architects, builders, developers, and homeowners. So when talking with landscape architects as customers, they felt that there were sometimes unrealistic expectations, that there wasn't always a they weren't necessarily always great at speccing the material with the correct specifications and sizes, and that they might put the plant in their plans, but then they haven't talked to the city that might have other requirements. So these are just some specific comments that were made. For builders and developers, they definitely mentioned this time frame of installation as being a challenge with, do they have the plants at the right time that they need to be installed, so that availability and are the timelines for the grower, they might be unrealistic for how they're growing. Sometimes they've had example with problems with canceling, or also problems with pricing and payments. And then lastly, the homeowner issue of lack of knowledge, which we hear over and over again. And then the last piece that we asked, which we said, what's the importance of these factors to your industry? So drought tolerant plants, native plants, research and availability of new cultivars, water conservation, and policies. And, a lot of these they see as important or very important to their industry. The three that kind of rose to the top, which 74 to 79% of respondents believed were either important or very important, were research of new cultivars and availability of those cultivars, water conservation, and the policies and regulations related to water. So with that, we're going to close up with a final poll. And we're going to say, how ready do you think Florida's landscape industry is to widely adopt water efficient landscaping practices? Very ready, somewhat ready, neutral, not very ready, not ready at all. So hopefully we're a little bit ready, but I think there are a lot of challenges that we can try to work on. So, and we definitely encourage you again, feel free to put information in the chat or the Q&A with ideas or ways that we can collaborate on moving this process forward. How we can really try to advance water efficient landscaping statewide. Who didn't we include yet? So we know that there are some stakeholders that were not included in the focus groups, and part of that's because of timing and recruitment and being able to get everybody scheduled into one of the time slots. So we had a short timeline. So we recognize there's some people that may not have been involved in those focus groups. So for example, growers, we didn't always, we had growers involved, but we wanted to get more input from growers, which is why we did those intercept surveys. So if there's another group that we feel like, hey, we should focus in on a little bit more, let us know what that is. And I think we're about to hear what you say. So somewhat ready. Okay, that's optimistic. So so good. We're gonna keep working forward on some of these things. Hopefully some of the items that came out in our research will help you in your own work. We did want to close with a thank you. We did receive funding to help support those focus groups and the folks that were participating. So we want to thank the Florida Nursery Growers and Landscape Association. They provided us with the initial grant that really helped launch this project. Thank you very much. We also received a grant from the UF Center for Land Use Efficiency, who also supported this project. So without them, this project would not have happened, and we're very grateful for their support. We'd also like to thank and acknowledge all the participants who we surveyed, interviewed, and did focus groups with. And with that, we are going to close up with, I think, questions.
Great. If you all have questions, please put them in the Q&A, and I will note that the chat was not open. So if you have any comments or specific questions that we can't answer here, both of them have emails on the screen, and you can contact them directly. Let me start with what kind of nonprofits were interviewed in your focus groups?
Yeah, so I think we only had one, but basically it was a nonprofit that's very involved in these issues of sort of landscape development, particularly in large scale. So I don't want to name any specific folks who participated, but we did, through the interviews, the key informant interviews that we did, we specifically had those people we interviewed give advice. Who do you see as working in this field? Who do you think we should be reaching out to? Who needs to be in these conversations? So we did try to reach a diversity of stakeholders and across industries based on that feedback. We would love to hear from more folks. So don't be hesitant about reaching out to us if you'd like to talk to us. Could be a 5-minute conversation, or if you want to talk for an hour, we can do that too.
Great. Let me go to the next one. Is our state government working on regulations to reduce usage? I'm sure that you have talked to some government agencies.
So yeah, I don't know, Yilin, did you want to, I know your internet is a little unstable. Did you want to pop in for that at all?
Yeah, I will try to answer. Let me know if my sound become too choppy. Uh, yeah, I know we discussed with some municipalities, some government entities, even regional entities. So some are using like water restrictions as a tool, and that may be, and also use a consumptive water use permit as their tool. So it varies, but these are the two I think we primarily hear. And as far as that shallow ditches in front of houses to absorb water instead of like sending water down through the gutters, they have not mentioned that. But I do know for the state now they have some new rules for stormwater management, especially it's like how we can more effectively treat water using these stormwater systems. Yeah, there are some new rules, but I'm not aware of this particular one. And Ondine, do you have anything to add to that?
No, I don't right now, but I think that's important for us to keep tracking. There's always new things that are being proposed in the legislature and then seeing which ones actually make it through. Um, yeah, I think what we heard a lot was through the water management districts. We heard a lot about the consumptive use permits as a way to kind of reduce water usage. And I'm not sure if anything froze. Did we have another question, Jennifer? I see one here. What is the best smart irrigation controller brand on the market, specifically for a single family home? So that's a good question. We did not delve into specific brands. And so I would not be able to answer that question. We did have a question about technology, and we did have some irrigation folks involved in the focus groups. A lot of people felt like soil moisture sensors were not a good technology to have at the residential level because there are just challenges with soil moisture sensors, which is the sensor that goes in the soil and actually tests the soil moisture. Smart irrigation controllers, people did feel were positive. There's a lot of new technology that's continually emerging. It seems to be continually improving. I don't know if Elin, if you had anything you wanted to add to that.
I think you cover most of that. Yes, we discussed that piece of that, but not really into the detailed like the brand. But it's just a general concept with the sensor and with the like real life, like live data, seeing how much water is used, how much adjustment you can make will from the focus group reviews, the industry perspective, they believe that will be very beneficial.
So I see there was one question about advice for greenhouse production related to water management. We did have a grower that talked a lot about mycorrhizae and the importance of having that in the soil and having really good quality soil health at the nursery level. And if those plants are kind of started off really well, that they can actually be much better in terms of establishment and long-term longevity in the landscape. So we did have a grower talk a lot about that component of soil health before it gets to the landscape. And there's another question here about training around growing natives. So there, we didn't have as much conversation about growing natives, I think, in our focus groups, but we have this is a challenge for I think nursery growers, and there is some work evolving. I know at the University of Florida and other places around how can we grow more natives at the nursery level. And I don't know if Elin, if you wanted to add to that.
I'm trying to recall what
Yeah,
our participants
if
said
if there
because
was,
there were a lot of data we collected.
yeah. And we go to a lot of other forums too. So sometimes we're like, okay, did we hear that in the focus groups?
Yeah.
But there is a lot of conversation about expanding native plant production and the
Hmm.
challenges that are involved with that. And we didn't dive specifically into that in these focus groups.
No, we didn't.
So let's see, there's some other questions here. Status of turf coverage reduction. So this was mentioned as a strategy that some communities are doing to reduce water efficiency. I think that's an interesting question because I think it's something we might want to dive into more when we do a case study to better understand once a landscape is designed and installed at the builder developer level, then it gets transferred to the homeowner. Sometimes changes happen at the homeowner level. So you might reduce that turf to meet a criteria or demand, but then once the homeowner takes it over, that initial design might be circumvented. So I think that there's more to investigate on how that works, in my perspective, from what I'm hearing.
Well, we are out of time. I'm so sorry I got kicked out for a second.
That's
So
okay.
I couldn't keep up with the questions for y'all. Thank you so much for presenting. That was a really, really interesting presentation, very interesting study. Please join us, everybody, next month for developing a weed management program with Dr. Chris Marble. Again, thank you two so much for joining us. If you do have any questions or have any comments, please see the emails at the bottom of the screen. Thank you again. Everybody have a great day.
We hope to hear from some of you in the future.
Thank you.
Thank you.